another one.
This one you really want to listen up because it's going to be the probably the most important part of your QA journey, right? Especially in today's day and age. So, especially Sean, starting as a QA analyst, listen up, all right? Topic is testing in Agile. I work for a company that does 2 week sprints. At the end of 2 weeks, we push to prod. I wanted to know what type of testing should happen at what stages of those 2 weeks. Also, what should the testing, continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD pipeline look like? All right. So that is the question. Very, very important because if you are not familiar with Agile and Scrum, I would say stop whatever you're doing, right, and go learn about it. When I was at a company for like 9 years, right? When I was ready to go to a different company, and almost forgot. I don't want a good guy to be popping up and say start the timer. But when I was getting ready to go to another company after a company I was at for 9 years, right? Was it nine? Uh, Might have been seven. I think it was seven, right? But it's not the point. When I was ready to go to another company, right? And I had never really knew what Agile and Scrum was, but I had a friend who was working at that company and he was the Scrum Master. And I was like, let me start learning about this, right? So I was using Udemy. I went and found a Udemy course called Testing in Agile. And I started going through that, figuring out how, like, first, what Agile is, about like the different people in it, the like how it works in general, right? And then I went and further on in the course, they talked about like how does testing work in Agile, right? So that's number one. That is very, very important. Now, in Agile, we have something called sprints, or in Scrum, we have something called sprints, right? And in the sprints, it's meant to deliver regularly, right? Most sprints, you can have a sprint for like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. 99% of the time, sprints go for 2 weeks, right? Where you say, okay, these are the stories we're going to work on for these 2 weeks, and then after the 2 weeks, you should be like at least merging to master. You should be deploying, pushing to prod, as the question says, right? So definitely get familiar with that, right? Now, what type of testing should happen and at what stages of those 2 weeks? I'm going to break it down like this, right? Because the question is specific to testing, but as a QA engineer, QA analyst, whatever title that you have, like SDET, whatever the case may be, right? We all pretty much do very similar things. I'm going to just broaden it out a little bit more, and maybe I'll go into this deeper in the Patreon, right? But let's just take it as the involvement that the QA person on the team should have is you want to be involved at the very, very beginning, from planning, from refinement of the stories to planning to the work in the actual sprint to deployment, right? So by refinement, when we are talking about the stories to talk about um, what is the acceptance criteria of the stories, you want to be contributing, you want to be asking questions, you want to be saying, okay, how, like, in what ways are we going to be able to test this? You want to ask all of those questions, right? So that you can be involved and you can be considered during, like, when I say you, I mean for testing and QA to be considered during the development, right? So that's not technically testing, but that's, like, I'm saying this has to be part of the QA process, right? Getting involved early, okay? And so you're asking these questions, and you're asking, okay, so how are we going to test this? And now you're contributing to the pointing of the story, which is saying, okay, this is the level of effort that it's going to take, which is including development and testing, right? So that's the first part, right? Of the stages of those 2 weeks, right? Before the 2 weeks even start, that's number one. And now you're planning so now the story's in the sprint, right? And you want as soon as the sprint, like as soon as the team starts working on the story, you want to start writing your test plan or your test case, whatever the case may be, where you're saying, okay, based on the acceptance criteria, based on the story, this is how we're going to approach testing, right? So if it's API, we're going to do, let's say the CRUD. So we're going to do the, like, if I send this post request, then we should get this response. If I send this get request, you should get this response. So far, the developers might be starting on the development, or they might not even do that yet, right? But you write down all the scenarios, right? And then you have a discussion and a conversation with your developers where you say, okay, this is my testing approach. Do you guys see any gaps in there? Is there anything that I'm not considering? And at the same time, they will also be able to see if there's any things that they're considering based on your testing approach, right? That's step 2. So now once the development is done, right, in the development environment that you guys are working on, it might be on a branch, it might be just a development environment. So now you test those changes there, make sure that those are all working and stuff. Now it depends on how your company works, right? Because you might go to from development to staging, and then from staging to production, or you might go from development to production, right? It just depends. But if you do go to staging, you do want to have regression tests, right? And I would say that it's going to be essential to have automated tests, right? So after you have your test plan created, and the developers are building out the software, right? You want to start writing your automation tests as much as you can, so that once the development is done, then you can just start plugging in little details here and there. But you want to get as far with your automation tests as possible, and so that way you do your manual testing once the development is done. But you also update your automated test. You try your very best to get that test, your automated test, as part of the story. It's part of that deployment, right? Because here's what always happens. When you do not put your automated tests in that story, it goes into the backlog and it goes there to die, right? So you want to do your very best to get your automated tests as part of the work that's happening in the sprint, okay? So now development is done, you test, you verify things are working, you run your automated tests, you update those, that's working. And now let's say you go to stage, you run your test and you run those regression tests in stage, right? So you're making sure the new development is working and previous implementations did not break by the new development. And at what stage does that happen, right? It depends when you push the stage, right? Because let's say you push the prod at the end of the 2 weeks. Are you pushing the stage a day before the end of those 2 weeks? So but you still want to run those same tests in whatever next environment there is. And then once you get to prod, sometimes you can't run certain tests in prod, but you run the test that's possible to run, and you go from there, right? So that is the idea. That is the concept, right? And what should the CI/CD pipeline look like? It depends, because if you're only pushing the prod at the end of 2 weeks, then you might have a merge to prod process, which is going to execute those particular regression tests that can be executed in prod. And you might have a merge to stage where you have all your regression tests run. It just depends. But because the way that I've done it is, we don't wait till the end of 2 weeks to push to prod. As soon as things are ready, we deploy those chunks of code, we merge them into master, and we're ready to go. But I've worked at companies where it's been at the end of the 2 weeks where we merge all of the different changes for that sprint together, and then we go to production, right? So it just depends, but it doesn't really change everything what I said. It's just the pipeline would change just a bit, but that is not too big of a deal to get around, I personally prefer the way that I do it now, because we deliver fast, we deliver often, and that is the spirit of Agile, all right?
If you enjoyed the fascinating information shared in this video and you want more, be sure to hit the subscribe button to Tech Coach Ralph to be notified for new videos.